Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local. Qualified hope. All right. Now, so another interesting development. We've been talking for now what feels like a couple of weeks, but it's only been about a week, about the revelation by Prabhakar Raghavan, the SVP at Google, who is basically runs search and their ad business, that 40% of Gen Z were not using Google for local search. They were instead using TikTok and Instagram. And, we wrote about that and talked about that in previous episodes. And now this week, Instagram updated its map and now has a sort of dynamic searchable map with, I'll let you describe it in further detail, David.
Sure. Well, there's not really much to describe. I would say it's I would say it's a pretty significant upgrade on their prior map
Definitely.
search experience, and that there are now filters that you can use and, look for certain accounts, that sort of thing. I don't necessarily have any great insights from a pure product standpoint of, oh, this is really going to be the killer feature and that sort of thing. It's more directionally, I just thought it was a very interesting story for a couple of reasons. Number one, Mike's tinfoil hat comment, and plenty of others online on Twitter, including Rand Fishkin, saying, oh, really interesting that Google sort of let this leak just as this big antitrust movement is about to come to a head. And so the timing of this announcement and the release from Facebook is really interesting. It actually, in a way, does Google a little bit of a favor,
sure,
because they now have something concrete to point to say, look, Facebook has its own version of what we're doing that's equally successful, and it's bleeding users, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I actually see this as, well, two things. First of all, Facebook has been, I don't even know if you could even say, trying things in local for a decade. They sort of
gave
things
up
against the wall and leave them there. Exactly. So I don't know that they've ever really had a concerted effort in local. But that this now is a significant upgrade to an experience that they may either see high usage of already within Instagram, which is interesting in and of itself, or they may see that this is now an opportunity, given the other dynamics in the market, to actually attract some additional usage through this new sort of map search interface. So that's number one, is just that this feels like more of a natural fit than anything else they've tried, which has been sort of a bolt-on to a complete separate product, right? Like Marketplace is kind of the thing that sticks out to me, is like that was sort of taking pieces of behavior that were happening in the newsfeed and creating a product from it. Here, I think it's the reverse, that they're seeing behavioral usage and sort of trying to go with the flow as opposed to divert the river in a different direction. So that to me is kind of interesting. Number two, I think it's actually, again, just conceptually, I'm not talking about specific features here or anything like that, but conceptually, this actually does feel like something that a non-TikTok user, but also somebody who thinks the Google results are crap these days, or thinks Google's too polluted or whatever, they actually might use. To me, this is something that has a far wider potential demographic appeal than the TikTok search experience, and generally the experience of sitting through multiple tens of seconds of video stuff just to kind of get what you're interested in. I think Instagram still is a really browsable, visual interface, and the sort of layering of the influencer level with photos, with location, I think just makes a lot more sense on Instagram than it does on TikTok. So I think that there's real potential here for this to actually become something. I think it actually might be more likely to bleed usage and users away from Yelp than it is Google. I think that the overlap of audiences and sort of online phone behavioral usage is probably more significant with Yelp's user base. But I think it could be one of the 1,000 nicks that does start to bleed some usage away from Google in local.
Do you think that Facebook is excited about access to location information in a more focused way that would fulfill their advertising aspirations.
Sure. I mean, this is search behavior, right? I mean, you could easily target someone that you knew lived in Portland and was looking at stuff in San Francisco to say, okay, if you're a San Francisco hotel, this person is planning a trip
Yeah.
somewhere. There's some really interesting user data here that this might enable them to capture. So,
Well, and it's worth pointing out that search advertising is immune to a lot of the privacy critiques that behavioral targeting has suffered or
yep.
confronted. Um, it's interesting because I spoke to somebody at Instagram before the pandemic, and I don't know if that was 2019. It must have been 2019. Who was saying we're going to do a lot of stuff. We're seeing stuff in travel. We're going to do a lot more, and restaurants. We're going to do a lot more stuff in local, and then it sort of never materialized. And the way that they announced
Right.
this was not. There was no press release. There was nothing on the blog. There was no blog post. It was just a Zuckerberg screenshot with a piece of text on it, and you had to sign into Instagram to see it, which was really weird. And so it was just a very low key kind of almost like an aside or off the cuff thing. No, there was no real announcement or fanfare. And I mean, Facebook blew it when they didn't get Waze in 2013 or whenever that was. They were negotiating with Waze and they were going to spend $1 billion on Waze, and then Google swooped down and stole it from them, or there was some snag with Facebook and Google wound up getting Waze, which they totally didn't need, even though they've integrated some of Waze's features. And they still sort of don't know exactly how to manage the two brands. I don't think um, that would have been a game changer for Facebook, and we would have seen the company kind of go in a completely different direction. Now, I think that Facebook has gotten what it needs from small businesses in terms of ad revenue. So, arguably, after a certain point, my prior belief was until they developed a really great local consumer product, they weren't going to get the same ad revenue. But they have. They have managed to get a lot of the small business ad revenue in the absence of a real consumer experience. So, arguably, they don't need it. But I think they may need some search advertising revenue these days, ironically, given the loss of ad IDs and stuff like that. So we'll see. I think that for people who use Instagram, it's a good option. It's an interesting option. I mean, I would never go to something like TikTok, but as I said in one of the posts, I talked to my 23-year-old daughter, and I said, how do you find information? And she just took me through it very quickly, boom, 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 and showed me she gets a ton of information visually about a restaurant from TikTok. There's a certain level of authenticity there, quote unquote, and then you get a lot of information about the menu, about the interior, the experience that she says is very hard to get from Google directly. Even if you're reading reviews. So reviews for a certain category of people emerge as a really inefficient way to get information versus the visual content that you would get from Instagram or TikTok, which I thought was really interesting.
Right, but that's where I think the differentiator is here is that Instagram lends itself to actually a much faster review of visual information than TikTok does. Now, I don't know, I'm not a TikTok advanced user like it
Yeah,
sounds like your daughter is, but it just strikes me that Instagram is a more natural search experience than TikTok. TikTok might be something where you go once you've identified two or three places that you're considering
I agree
for
with
the
that. I
consideration
agree
phase.
with that. Is that you can cover
I don't think it would be as good for the pure discovery
right.
phase
You
as
cover more
Instagram would.
ground more quickly with Instagram than you do with TikTok, which is more clunky from my point of view. But for people who are really comfortable with it, maybe not. It's a very different orientation, I think, than what we're old, relatively speaking, and we do the things the old-fashioned way, right? Keyword in a box, look at the reviews, look at the map. But I mean, you made an interesting comment last week, I think, about what would it be like if you designed a map, from the ground up. Uh, Google Maps is essentially a translation of a paper map in some
Right.
sense,
Without knowing Rand
right?
McNally, right? I mean,
This is closer to that. This is not maybe that exact thing, but it's closer to that, and it's interesting. And so we'll have to see. I mean, we'll have to. I don't know how we'll get data about. There's no data forthcoming about adoption and usage of these things. It's just Google's own surveys, presumably, that they're relying upon. Hey, what do you use for local search? And they're probably getting, they do survey after survey after survey, and they're probably getting responses that say, I use TikTok, I use Instagram. And so they're extrapolating from that. So we'll have to do our own research, I think.
Sounds good. And thank you for including me in the relative aging group, not the absolute aging group.
Well, all age is relative, right? But anyway, all right. And we're nearing the conclusion of our digital agency survey. We've got a lot of good responses. We're still looking for a few more. If you haven't taken that survey, we'll do one more push with the link. Please do take it. It's going to be a lot of valuable information for us and for you, because it'll allow for a certain level of benchmarking. I think there's going to be some really interesting findings there. So please take that, and please remember to subscribe to the Near Media if you don't already. And that concludes my remarks for this week. If you would like to add anything.
All good. Have a great
See you
week.
next week.
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.